Hello, I'm Arik Korman, Communications Director at League of Education Voters, and the parent of a fifth grade son in the public school system who receives special education services. Like many of you, I'm doing coronavirus triple duty, working, parenting, and teaching from home. In case you're not familiar with us, League of Education Voters is a statewide nonprofit working with families, educators, and leaders to build a brighter future for every Washington student. Our website is educationvoters.org. We believe that education is a tool for justice. The project of dismantling the systems that perpetrate the violence and oppression experienced by communities of color begins in schools. We believe every child deserves an excellent public education that provides an equal opportunity for success. In order to achieve this, we must pursue radical change in our school systems for equity, justice, and liberation. We must build schools and systems that honor the humanity in every student. Welcome to our free online webinar series, Lunchtime LEVinars. We started this series 7 years ago to share information and build knowledge on important and timely issues. Today's LEVinar features 2 schools on keeping students engaged during COVID-19. With school buildings closed at least through the current academic year, schools across Washington state are implementing continuous learning plans. Students, parents, and educators are trying to navigate new systems and expectations. One of the biggest challenges schools face is how to keep every student engaged. In this webinar, 2 schools will join us from the different sides of Washington state. Dr. Cindy McMahon, principal of the community school in Spokane, which serves students grades 9 through 12, and Justin Hendrickson, principal of South Shore PreK-8 in Seattle, will share what is working and will answer your questions. A couple of housekeeping items before we begin. You'll notice a Q&A function at the bottom of your screen. This is the space for you to submit questions to us. As always, feel free to send any feedback about the webinar quality to us on the chat function or at info@educationvoters.org. The community school turns learning upside down. Instead of teacher-centered instruction, learning is student-driven. Instead of a 6-period day where courses are taught separately, students dive into authentic projects that integrate core subjects. The community school is affiliated with the New Tech Network and is the first New Tech Network school in Eastern Washington. There are over 200 New Tech Network schools in 28 states. The New Tech Network model is based on 4 design pillars: outcomes that matter, student outcomes for college, career, and civic life readiness, teaching that engages, project and problem-based approach to instruction, culture that empowers, school-wide culture of empowerment for students and adults, and technology that enables, use of technology for collaboration, access to information, and self-directed learning. The community school is a school of choice in Spokane, where every student can flourish in a supportive, personalized learning environment. Through project-based, real-life learning, their mission is to create a vibrant culture that encourages creativity, problem-solving, and a commitment to making the world a better place. Their graduates are ready for life after high school, college, career, and lifelong learning. South Shore PreK-8 school in the heart of Seattle's Rainier Valley takes great pride in serving their 700 students and their families in the 98118 zip code. They offer a full pre-K program, that's a full day pre-K program, a strong focus on early learning from pre-K through 3rd grade, a robust commitment to social emotional learning and leadership, small class sizes, a rigorous math curriculum in 5th through 8th grade, and a seamless transition from elementary to middle school. Their students enjoy a well-rounded educational day that includes art, physical education, music, instrumental music, Mandarin, and outdoor education with their community garden. Their program features include a continuum of special education services, supports for English language learners, a generous after-school program, and a dynamic community partnership, many of them actually, that enhance both the school day and after school. South Shore's vision is, we are the bright spots on a magnificent journey. Together, we create a loving community of purposeful learning that focuses on the whole child, body, mind, and spirit. Welcome, Community School Principal McMahon and South Shore Principal Hendrickson. I appreciate you taking the time today.
Good afternoon, Eric.
Yeah, thank you
Thank you,
very much.
Arik.
Wonderful to have you here. So this is a strange time for many reasons. We have COVID-19 as a backdrop, and we have civil unrest and protests and a real spotlight shown on the problem of systemic racism. How are you engaging students during this time, especially with the current landscape?
So yeah, what was the beginning of the invitation to this webinar, and thank you, League of Education Voters, and to Sandra Jarrett in particular, because she invited me to do this. When we were talking about doing this, and Justin and I were just talking about this, that the title was, how do you keep kids engaged during COVID-19? And then in this last few days, week, all of a sudden that became the backdrop for something that is so significant, that is impacting all of our country. We both talked about the cities that we're in and what we're seeing and what we're experiencing, and the protests and then the disruptions that are going on. And for me, I will just offer this, and then we can see how Justin's feeling. Our staff is in pain because we can't be with our students. And that is how we got through, not got through, but learned through Ferguson, all of the different racial and economic and educational disparities that become part of our projects. Our project-based learning is authentic, and it engages us all around current issues. So we're not here this week to provide that safety, that trusting environment, those predictable adults in their lives, that we can talk openly about these things. So how we're handling it is with a lot of pain and from a distance, and that's not how we want to handle this. That said, we communicate a lot with our kids through certainly Zoom, but also email, and through our learning management system, Echo, phone calls, emails. It's just not the same.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, go ahead, Eric.
I was just going to toss it over to you. It sounds
Yeah,
like there's a lot going on.
Yeah, absolutely. And I've been talking to staff, not just, in the last couple of days, but particularly in this last week or two, is a lot of this actually feels secondary at this point. And it's an interesting spot to be in, because as Cindy knows, like, there are still a lot of things rolling. I mean, we're still trying to close out the year, and what for so many of us is a really great time of year. Like, we finished state testing, we've done all these things. These are the times where the classrooms are humming and the relationships are solid, and we get to do some of those things that we didn't think we had time to close out the year, something fun to send them off in the summer, and we're not able to do that. And I know my role as a school leader, and a very lucky school leader representing South Shore, is balancing how we support our kids and our families and our community, but also, I know Cindy feels this too, is how do we support our adults and all our staff, who, this is a double-edged sword, is that, not only are we not able to engage with students, but now there's such a need for us to engage with students the way that we know how, and we've been doing well for so long. How do we have a restorative circle, or a circle across Zoom? How teachers are experts at reading body language, and just being able to be proactive when you see a kid who doesn't ask for help, but they're asking for help. And how do we do that when we can't be next to them? And you mentioned it in the opening too, Arik, is, these are not just, it's not just about kids, these are about families. As a school that is, 90% students of color, and as our superintendent has defined it, 75% historically underserved students of color, with a high African-American male population. This has hit us really, really hard. And so, yeah, we're certainly trying to think about how to stay engaged and shift these things. But in staff meetings this week, we've also talked about how the lesson plans that we were working on last week were thrown out the window. Like, we have to create space for conversations this week, knowing that they could be messy. And Cindy and I were talking a little bit earlier, we don't have all the answers. I don't think anyone has all the answers, but part of our job as educators is to lead and to step up and support. And our teachers know how to do that really, really well. And as a school, you know, we want to stay engaged. We want to, and like Cindy mentioned, any which way possible, text, calls. Like I make several calls a day to families. I just kind of cold call and how are you doing? Those sorts of things, because, you know, so many of us are just social people, and we go from a day where we're having 700 to 1,000 human contacts in a day to my family and maybe my neighbor, and that's hard. But, you know, all things considered, I think, you know, the teachers are absolutely trying everything they can to keep students engaged, but also be mindful of the backdrop of what's going on nationwide and right here in our cities.
Yeah, that's a challenge too, thinking about there's a call to get involved. There's a call in Spokane and Seattle. Justin and I were talking about that, to go to protests, to get out and speak up. How do we reconcile that with the orders from our state to be socially distanced and stay at home as much as you can and be in small groups and stop and wash your hands? And we're seeing thousands of people out of a higher calling and need to get out there. And so that creates the very real possibility that the number of cases are going to increase, and the staging of phase 1, 2, 3, 4 is going to get disrupted as well. So it's trying to make sense out of so many cultural and structural things, influences. And we're just talking education. I mean, then we add the economic piece and the social justice pieces. This is the most complex and transformative time, whether we want it or not. And I'm hoping, and I know many of you who are watching this webinar are hoping that this interruption that has now become a disruption is going to result in something really powerful and equitable and transformative for education. That's what I hope, and I know that the people at my school are already of that bent, that we have to change the way learning happens, the way relationships in schools happen, the way relationships with families happen. So this is an opportunity to do that, everybody. Find your people and start talking about what could be possible.
Well, Cindy, what are some of the things you're hearing from your students at the community school? What are they saying during this time?
Well, I asked, so we Zoom through advisory. I should mention that. A key piece of what is successful in the structure of our school is daily advisory. And we almost wanted to change the name, because when people think of advisory, they think of it that 20 minutes a couple times a week, or every Friday for 15 minutes. Every day our students are in their advisory from the day they walk in our building for an hour until they graduate. So that cohort of students and that adult stays together throughout their high school career. And they know each other very deeply. They learn to know each other very deeply. So there's one structural piece that makes it work for us to stay connected and know our students and their families deeply. Another piece of this is the learning at our school is organized so that students are in cross-grade investigative team research. So they learn to work together and ask each other really hard questions and work through really hard explorations. And then they really learn to be presenters of their learning too. So when March 17th happened and we had the transition day, we were just wrapping up our integrated projects for our grade levels. And suddenly that was interrupted. So while our students left, they all have Chromebooks, they left, they knew that they had to wrap this project up, and we told them, stay tuned, we're gonna meet and we'll talk about what to do next. And then that small staff of innovative people said, let's do a whole school project on this, because that's what we do. So the name of the project was Supporting a Community in Crisis. and it had several layers, understanding, just researching and understanding pandemics and other crises that interrupted the world. And it went clear back to the 13th century, when so many people died of the plague in Europe. 60%, I learned. So crises, this is not something new. It just hasn't happened at this level for the last 100 years. So they did some research, they did some planning, and then they took action. That lasted about a month. That was during the time that they thought that their grades are frozen, everybody's going to get, you don't have to worry about it. Then that shifted, the project ended, and we shifted to, now you are really in charge of learning. Every student has their own individual learning plan, and it shifted through the advisor is the person that's going to connect with their plans. And what's cool is there is different as the students. Every student designs their own plan around the content area that they need, of course, as high school students, but how they do it is very inventive, and it's individual to students. And some of them are teaming up to do things, and some of them are choosing their own pathway. So I think that was another piece, that our students were already driving their learning, and then they had a lot of freedom to choose how they were designing their learning. So that's kind of how we've stayed engaged, and we are really surprised and happy to know that I think there's not a student at our school that hasn't been connected. But then we talked about levels of engagement. There's, we know where they all are. About 70% are pretty engaged in a consistent way with their learning plan, and the other 30%, we talk about, pulling them along and finding, inroads so that they'll stay connected. But we know where they're at, we know where they are, and we're staying as connected as possible. So that's what I have to say about what happened at the transition and how we survived it and continue to.
Great. And Justin, what's working for you at South Shore in Seattle?
I think we have a couple things that are working out pretty well for us, always with a grain of salt. But, on the elementary side, the shift looked a little bit different. They have, students have one teacher. And so the relationships there tended to be a little bit stronger in that aspect. And so, teachers fumbled around a little bit, and then got class meetings going and opportunities for students to engage. One of the things that we did sort of immediately was, with the help of the district and Amazon, was we were able to get 200 laptops into students' hands who didn't have that. And so one of the first things immediately after we were out of school in March was shifting our focus on our MTSS wellness team to be a little more teacher friendly, because the teachers at that point were going to be our front line for all contact with families, all contact with students. And we were really cognizant of the fact that we didn't want 5 separate people calling one family and hands not talking to each other. So, some of the things that we shifted was we created a school-wide spreadsheet database where we pre-populated all of our students, and we shifted some of the questions. And, the first one is, how are you doing? And shifted towards the essential needs. Do you need anything? And then we hopefully got a little information around, like, do you have access to technology? And we're specific about that as not your mom's phone or your auntie's phone or your brother's phone. Like, do you have something you can actually do some work on? And if you did, do you have internet? Because so many of our kids were able to walk up to the Rainier Beach Library and use hotspots there, or come to the community center. We're connected to the community center and got computers there. And so that has still been an obstacle for us, because the districts had to prioritize, our high school seniors and those sorts of things. And I think districts across the nation are trying to figure out about internet access, and just like water, sewer, garbage. At this point, if we don't have high quality internet, like that's a challenge. So we started with the fundamentals, with the continuations of supports with students, creating spaces for them to come in. And then we were able to work with families to figure out what we could do more. And that meant having teachers set up times that they could then meet with either individual students or small groups of students and continue some of that learning. But I know we had a couple of weeks where we spun our wheels in a sense, because so many of our kids did not have any access to technology. And so, you know, trying to figure out where we left off and how do we supplement, hoping that technology would increase engagement. But we've also found, like Cindy said too, just because they have a Chromebook and internet does not mean that they're able to engage in the way that we would think. And I think, you know, for so many families, whether, you know, you have lucky to have two parents at your house and they're both working, and that's a blessing, but how are you managing your students at that point in time? And you know, most families do not have a certificated teacher in their house, and I am a teacher at my house, and I struggle with that. You know, with a kindergarten and a second grader at my school, how are we figuring this out? Because so many of us too, home was not the place that we did school. You know, we come home and we are able to kick our shoes off and catch our breath, and we've had to shift our spaces to work spaces and to school spaces, as well as the space that we're all cohabiting for a really large portion of the day, every day. And so, you know, I think we're continuing to figure out ways to better engage students and also better engage families, because we know that for so many of our younger students, they aren't able to, like our secondary students, plug along on computers on their own. They need support. They need someone sitting at that kitchen table with them. And so, you know, what that's looked like for my kindergarten daughter, my second grade daughter is, you know, a couple times a week, they'll have a class meeting where folks jump in and they do some things. Our counselor on the elementary side has a show and tell and a little game of charades she has kids jump into as well. She just holds the card up to her head and the kids are engaged in that. And then there's a different sort of reading lessons. So maybe they'll have 2 or 3 kids and the teacher will meet with them for 20 minutes and they'll do a lesson. They'll talk about it. They'll come back. But teachers have shifted their work schedules just like everyone else. I feel like our days are going longer. The days are blurry. A lot of times I have to remind myself what day it is. And it's also interesting because, like Cindy said, you know, that mid-March point for a lot of us is the point where we've really hit a stride. You know, there aren't those breaks coming in. We don't have a holiday break or a midwinter break or anything. Like, we have a good stretch of learning. And so that's the time a lot of us are really prepping for state tests, and we're trying to close out things and move forward. And we got the rug pulled out right from under us. And so at this point, having conversations with teachers, they're saying, like, how can we continue some of this work over the summer? We have momentum now. We've got kids who figured out how to engage with me on the computer, but it feels crazy to end this in 2 or 3 weeks. So those are conversations we're having now of how do we continue some of these moving forward. And then lots of conversations around how do we help the new teachers for next year, if we start remote, build relationships if they're not able to do what they've always done, and meet the families at the barbecue and do these sorts of things. So a lot of ifs, but there's a lot of good things coming out, and I hope through you know, support of Lev and other folks that we can share more of the resources that are happening, because some people are figuring this out, and there's no time to reinvent the wheel with this. We have to take what's working somewhere else, make it work for our school, so we can continue to engage with students and families.
Great, great. Well, thank you very much, Justin and Cindy. I really appreciate your insight on all of this. We now have time for questions, just about 10 minutes or so. Justin, Cindy, do you need to leave right at 1 o'clock, or can you stay a few minutes after?
Absolutely.
Where are we going?
Okay, great. So if you have a question for Justin or Cindy, please use the Q&A function at the bottom of the screen. No question is too basic. And here we go with the first one. What are some ways that student voices are included to the call for change? This is a strange time for our community, navigating COVID-19 and the changes in the nation, which continues to not necessarily listen to the pain that students and communities are feeling. And it's causing an emotional and societal toll. How are students being involved in this process?
Well, if there was ever a time when we needed to be connected, it is now. And being connected over a Zoom call or phone calls, it's like the minimum way that we can have these dialogues and conversations. What's happening at my school right now is we are shifting to our authentic assessments called our exhibitions of learning and growth. And every student, I just got off of a Zoom where every student will present their reflections about this year. And many of them are focused on what happened and how have they managed through this time of COVID. And so that has sort of focused our conversation on a reflective process of their learning. And what we are going to miss is extended time after that, that we would normally, well, the year would end, but if, like I said before, if we have a crisis, we get time and connection to talk through it. I worry about June 19th coming and then everybody's apart again in another way. We lose that expectation that we're going to stay connected through Zoom or phone calls or texts, and we all do that regularly. So this is escalating in our community, and the social justice issues are escalating, and the school year is going to end. So that's going to be our challenge. How do we stay connected? Because just because June 19th comes doesn't mean that we are not in a serious situation where your kids, Justin, when they're little ones up to 8th grade and our kids in high school, they need somebody to process and talk, process this and talk with. They have their families, maybe, and they have their friends in the high school level. Certainly our kids are talking to each other. But we really need to provide some ways, and we'll have to think about that as a staff. How can we provide some summer connections so as these things unfold and the kind of the school year, the credits and all those things that we worry about in high school, that's over. And now we can just talk as people. How do we as a community impact Spokane and the larger world, the larger community?
Right. And at South Shore, we, those, you know, getting to student voices has always been important to us. And you mentioned earlier, Arik, we do have some great community partners. And so through some of our community partners, we've been able to continue some of our student groups. And so we have a partnership with ACE Academy, which focuses on our African-American young men in middle school. And so we've been using them this year. We've had a partnership with them for several years, but this year we've been able to shift so that they had their own advisory and their own elective, which was not necessarily an elective, but we made it so. And so they've been continuing daily meetings with these young men, and they've been able to engage with some of the kids that we have not been able to engage with in the same way. And so that's been great because we have staff members as a part of that group as well as community members. And also for some of our girls, we're continuing our girls groups, and that's on that secondary middle school level. So they're able to, you know, like I said, we're creating space, and there's been a lot of conversations just in the last couple of days with staff. As you know, Arik, like we've been very intentional in the last 5 or 6 years that I've been at South Shore to really work hard to have our staff from you know, classified all the way to administration reflect who we serve. And so we're 60% staff of color, and so we're engaging as a staff on how to have conversations, and particularly with our white staff on how to not pretend that nothing else is going on. Like we have to acknowledge this, and we have to have some space for this, and we don't have the answers, but we're really pushing hard to, you know, think differently about you know, us as a system and our part in the larger sort of wheel of a big school system. Like, what do we have control over at South Shore? Can we ensure that even in remote learning, we're making sure that the authors we're working with are authors of color, or they represent viewpoints that our kids can have some connection to? And we can still do that at a very high level. But I think that we are really, we're really trying to figure that out, like Cindy said, because it feels like we are at a place where summer is not at the right time. You know, we feel like we really need to be able to keep these conversations going and these supports going over the summer, particularly for a lot of our kids who usually have had, you know, so many options over the summer for summer camps, and the camps that we run at school, those aren't going to happen. And so they're just going to continue with what they've been doing without some of the options that they've been able to have. So, and we recognize, from, how we're doing our yearbook to how we're doing our 8th grade promotion, that we have to have student voices in there. This is historic times, and I knew even at the high school level, some of the protests are having their high school seniors go out in their graduation gear as well, just because I think that juxtaposition of all of these things happening at once, we can lose track of, those kids who have been looking forward to graduating from high school, the first kids in their family to graduate from high school, and how much work they've had to get there, and now to be uncertain about what that looks like and uncertain with the future. It's really heavy.
Yeah, thanks so much for that. So here's another question about how to connect with students who might do well with technology online. My kindergartner seems to have been left behind. Online isn't working for him. He has sensory issues. What do you recommend for children with these issues, like my student, or even students who are older than kindergarten?
Yeah, well, I'll go first on the kindergarten because that's where I'm at.
Mm-hmm.
And my daughter's been, in my daughter's class of 20 plus kids, it's kind of been all over the place. And I know that, being able to serve students who have special needs during this time has been extremely difficult for so many reasons. But you know what I think I've seen work, at least to various degrees, is connecting with the family and just really, whether or not you're a parent or not, as a teacher, connecting with that parent, asking what you can do to support what is working, and trying some different things to see what's going to stick with that kid. And whether it's just simply, getting on a Zoom call and reading a book with each other, talking about some of the things that are going on. I think you just got to find that little hook to get them going, and then start continuing to reel them in. And and even with elementary, with my daughters too, there's days where they don't want to be engaged, and teachers are doing a great mystery guest in the class meeting today, and the girls have already been on 3 or 4 Zoom calls or whatever, and they're fatigued, like so many of us who are sitting looking at screens all day. It's really challenging. But I know there's also been a lot of conversation around, like, what can we do that doesn't necessarily involve technology. And one of the things that our physical education teacher does is she does 5-minute little workout videos, and she posts those to the YouTube. So we use those a lot. I get a lot of those workouts in with my daughters just to break it up a little bit and shift it a little bit. But I think the next step of this, depending on how this all plays out in September, is going to be more work with families around how they can support the learning at the house, and how they can become more familiar with the technology pieces that are going to be used. And I certainly know, speaking for Seattle, we're on Teams, but Teams hasn't been the greatest fit for a lot of our younger learners. And so how can we become a little more streamlined in our offerings? So if you have 3 students at 3 different grade levels, you're not juggling 3 different platforms and trying to figure those out, so there can be some more continuity in that. But I guess I say that to say is, think about what was working when you were in school, and trying to find some ways to replicate that best that you can across a screen.
Mm-hmm. And Cindy, what are you doing for students who don't necessarily thrive with online learning?
So when you say online learning, that has a lot of different meanings. Sometimes online learning means I'm working through a playlist of learning tasks or experiences that somebody has loaded up for me. So it's a matter of just working through those. We say we use technology as a tool. So our online learning is designed by our students and our staff. So it's really just a tool to communicate the work they're doing, and that may be work that involves technology, but it may be work that they're doing in their backyard. It's really fun to hear our kids talk about what they've been doing during COVID that are keeping them engaged and keeping them challenged. And when I think about the backyard, I was on a Zoom just now with a student whose project was around their garden and their yard and what she's been doing. and had lots of pictures and her experience of learning with that and the challenges of it, and how authentic and composed she was to just talk about, hey, so I took this into my own hands and did this thing. That's learning that's not online, but we really do need the technology to capture and keep track of the evidence of what kids are doing. But the idea of sitting at a computer every day, all day, or however long it takes you to work through these assignments, that's not what I think of when I think of online learning.
Great. Yeah. Yeah, because I have a question that relates to this, which is, as a shop teacher at the 9 through 12 level, I'm concerned about how hands-on, problem-based, project-based classes will survive in an online distance learning model. You can teach theory, but the important hands-on engagement is missed.
So that's a good example of a student saying, I want, and we had a student build, you know, those little libraries that are in the neighborhoods, little libraries, I think they're called. He designed and built one, and has had a lot of questions and a lot of learning, a lot of math and a lot of shop, industrial arts or applied industrial arts, I'm not sure what it's called now. He had to figure all those things out. So he had to investigate. There's the difference. I think that just came to me, is it's not about what that teacher knows and just tells you, here's how you do this. It's the teacher facilitating finding answers to your own questions. So when a student wants to build something, that shop teacher, whoever that shop teacher is, can help point them in the direction of them finding out what they need to know. And that includes safety videos, and that includes, you know, I mean, it's how we all learn as adults. We go to YouTube and find out, how do you build a fence, a deck? Our kids can do that. So we are necessary. We need to support the learning and ask the questions and point them if they aren't finding resources that they need. Mainly just cheerlead them on, be there for them, provide ideas. But if you're not with them, they'll stay connected to you if they think it's relevant.
Yeah, right. And you know, Cindy, in both those questions, you know, the thing that stood out to me was choice, student choice. And like anything, like if you're giving me a list of things that I have to do, yes, it depends. Most of them will probably get done. I might not like it, but if you're letting me choose from a menu, which is what our kindergarten teachers have shifted after some feedback as well. It's like, here's the menu of how you want to do this. Let the student choose. And that's helped my daughter engage more. I don't want to do the Venn diagram again, Dad. I want to do the retail. And just like you said there with the shop piece, right? At this point in time, like what can students do to you know, support community? Is it a little library? Is it you know, around our neighborhood we have little spaces where you can leave canned food and those sorts of things? Could they build that and then log on a FaceTime call with the instructor and say, hey, I'm trying to figure out this angle on here, help me out? It does lend to the question around access to tools and those sorts of things, but I think that's something that can be figured out, and I know the kids are going to lead us in that. I think it's more of us as adults who have a very fixed frame of how school has been for us and continues to be. And Cindy and I kind of said this earlier, is that if things aren't going to change after this, I don't think they're going to change. You know, like, we are a school that does not have single desks. All of our desks are put together in groups because that's how people work. Now we can't work like that. So how are we going to figure this out? But even with technology, the kids have been much further ahead than us as adults have at this point. And they'll continue to be.
Yeah, thanks for that. I've got a number of questions about what the fall will look like. So I'll try to put these together as best I can. So if schools are given the go-ahead to open in the fall, would it be wise to have face shields distributed to students, as those with problems with wearing masks, like fogging up eyeglasses, would be able to function safely in a better way? What about staff who might be at risk of contracting COVID-19? Will there be ways to protect staff who might need some additional PPEs or other protections? What will the fall look like, at least at this point, for your various schools?
I think the only thing I can say for sure, it's going to look different. It's amazing to hear the minutia of detail that needs to get in place for us to go back fully in fall. You know, we have a hard time keeping our middle school hands off each other regardless. Like, I mean, my list goes from one side to the other side of things that are going to be so hard. And one of the things that we had in a principal call the other day is principals, you know, saying like, I don't want to be a health officer. I can't screen 700 kids a day plus almost 100 staff every morning to get into class. What's that going to look like? What's the cleansing going to look like? How can kids go to the bathroom? We talk about shop, but then we talk about specialists. Teachers they need their breaks during the day. Do then our PE teachers come to the classroom? Like, there are so many levels of complexity in this that I will honestly say I don't know. And the only thing I do know is it will not be how we showed up in September this year. And every September I've been in schools my whole life.
Mhm.
I agree, Justin. I also would add that we won't be deciding that.
Yes,
We have to follow the science. We have to follow the outcomes that continue to unfold. So if anybody thinks they have a plan, they're gambling, because we don't know what the environment's going to look like and what the situation will be. That said, our district, and I know every district, is trying to figure out what are some possibilities. So I think, you know, like the 3-option plan that we get to come back in, you know, together, everyone, which is sort of a non-option. And then, you know, how would we stagger that, or are we forced to be remote 100%? So I think the questions about face masks and how do we arrange desks and those kinds of things are super important. And I think that we have groups like health professionals and experts that are going to figure some of those things out. What is it that we have to do? My interest is in more around how do we keep relationships with kids and their families, and find out how do we help them be. I love the part of your mission about the body, mind, and spirit of every student. That's what we should be concerned about. That was in the chat column. Someone said something about, you know, yeah, we have to think about how does the learning happen, but really, how are we promoting that whole child? How are we dealing with the things like depression and trauma when they come back to us and that they're in right now? I mean, those are the big questions. And then the technical pieces, we'll just have to deal with the best that we can. But we're people, and we really need to be listening to each other and reaching out to each other. And whether it's staff to students, our families, we need to stay connected. So it's all about relationships and connections. That's bottom line for me, is success in this is about staying connected.
Yep, and that won't change.
Won't change, shouldn't change.
Great. Yeah, thank you very much. So I've got time for 2 more questions. One of them is going to be about mental health, just to give you a clue. One's going to be about special ed. And then finally, I'll be asking you to share a win, something that went really well during this time that you want to lift up. So first, we'll start with mental health. How can we better address depression and other mental health issues in our students, either K-5 or even beyond into high school? What are you doing right now that seems to be working to support mental health?
You know, for us at South Shore, we have a lot of mental health supports available for students, and we've really been able to shift in the last couple of years to be able to provide those at the school level, and not necessarily rely as heavy on outside agencies who, and Cindy knows this, they'll come to school once a week or whatever, and those are great partners. But a lot of the work is done through the day-to-day pieces. And so what we've been able to do is continue some of those supports for particularly some of our students who, you know, had supports provided before this all happened. So those were our priorities and engaging with those students. And for a lot of those students, they're still meeting with counselors or are doing small group conversations through this. And then the other big part that we've been able to push is just the community resources that are continuing to be available. You know, and then also just tons of communication amongst us as staff. And, you know, we don't have that luxury of missing an email and then just hunting that teacher down in the hall. Like we are connecting a lot. And, you know, for example, we had a brother of one of the students at our school. He was murdered a couple weeks ago here. And we reached out to the family and we were talking about how to have these class meetings about this because, you know, all the students knew. And so we as a support team got together and we got some prompts going to get the circles going. And then we made sure families knew what we were going to talk about. And then we had our counseling staff kind of on call during that so that they could pop into that conversation if it was needed. But it's challenging because, like I said, teachers are experts at reading body language and seeing the kid before they start to cry or when they're asking for help without asking for help. And so being able to do that across a Zoom call is a completely different skill set that I think we're all trying to figure out as well. And I'm interested to hear at the secondary level how that's going as well, Cindy.
Yeah, we think about that a lot. It kind of goes back again to the relationships and connections that we hope are providing a safety net of knowing their advisor, their principal, their counselor care about them. We get those texts that, you know, I'm struggling right now. They're really close with each other too, so the peer connections really help. We worry a lot about the impact of kids being in isolation. That's why we made an all-out effort that every single student, we know where they are. And so that helps to know where they are. That doesn't say how they are. So I think the goal is to just, you know, stay as much as we can in connection. We have lots of resources that we can point them to if somebody needs some help with any particular thing. But frankly, it really does feel kind of powerless. They're out there and we can't, like you said, Justin, see the body language, see the face, hear someone else come to my office and say somebody's upset. That's just not happening because we're apart. So I don't have an answer to that. I just have a heightened awareness that we really all need to be paying attention to the mental health of our students, our families, our staff.
Yeah, thanks for your honesty. I really appreciate that. What about special ed? How are we supporting students in your buildings who are on IEPs?
That's been a challenge, you know, and I think that, like Cindy said, a lot of that has to do, that's not a principled decision on what that sort of looks like. But I do believe that, you know, we're doing the best with what we have, and what that looks like at South Shore is a lot of Zoom meetings, a lot of team meetings to continue the skills that we're working on. But one of our biggest challenges as a school that supports a continuum of SEL learners, you know, students who have challenges with behavior, is so much of that is focused on class. It's, you know, making sure that they can stay in class, making sure they have strategies when they get frustrated, that they don't blow out. And so we're having a lot of conversations on what does that look like virtually, and how do we support students, you know, and perhaps we meet with them before they go to the class meeting. We prep them for what that's going to look like. And so we're shifting a lot with that right now, but I would say that has been a frustration for everyone that I know with what this has looked like. And certainly for students with more profound special needs, like for many families, you know, they count on our expertise each and every day to provide these services to their student. And when we're not able to do that, they're having to try to do the best they can to provide those at the house. And that is incredibly hard. But I do believe that, you know, these are conversations that are continuing to go around at the highest level, because we're bound by the IEP and the IEP goals, and we really need to wrap our heads around, you know, our most vulnerable students and making sure that we're serving them first and foremost. Absolutely.
And Cindy, what's happening in your building?
Well, I was thinking about our district, and I actually, everyone's realizing this is really shining a light on the disparity between kids who need that extra help and got it in person when they were out of school. And when they're not at school, the challenge for them is so much more amplified than it is for our students who are jumping into this and saying, I can do this. So we have our special ed teacher has, like all of our teachers, has a personal relationship with every one of our students and their families. And it kind of depends on the student. They do have a separate independent, now that we're in learning plans, our IEP students have a learning plan that is parallel with their choices, their plans that they're choosing, and it needs to meet their IEP goals too. So Jackie Rogers is our special ed teacher, and she is masterful at marrying those. So our special ed students or students with other needs feel like they have choices too, and that they can meet their IEP goals. And I think especially a challenge is the social emotional piece, the interaction, kids who need that social support. That has
Yes.
now what, we're
Right.
trying to figure out ways for them to be able to be with other peers on Zoom,
Yep.
having more connection. It's just not the same. So I think those kids are really getting hit hard, whether they're ELL kids or special ed kids or any student with a disability that's keeping them from, hey, I'm going to go out and, build a
Lending library.
lending library.
Yeah.
The library.
Yeah.
That's easier said than done for some kids.
Yep.
So they need more support.
Yeah.
Yeah, thanks so much for that. So I want to close out with a question about something that was a big win, something that you were really excited about that happened. I don't want to necessarily, for example, Justin, give you this example, but when we were discussing before the webinar started, you talking about a Friday night movie night.
That was what I was going to say.
Hit. So if you want to use that one, feel free.
Absolutely. And so, I got an amazing third grade team who just takes care of whatever obstacles there are and just leaps over them like super people. And so one of my third grade teachers, she invited me to her class movie night the other Friday. And this is a class that I've gone into. One of my favorite classes. I've done restorative circles in there. We do circles on a weekly basis almost in there. And that teacher is just really dedicated to building classroom community. And that was evident absolutely before this happened. So, of course, I'm like, I would love to attend your little meeting. So got on Zoom the other Friday night at like 6, and she has 21 students in her class, and 20 of them were engaged on iPads and whatever in their bunk beds. And this teacher had gone out in the day or two before to each one of these kids' houses and dropped off a little gift bag with popcorn and some little snacks for the movie. And so, all these little faces are on the thing, and it was good because when I pop into the middle school ones, it's usually like the kids will hop off sometimes, like, oh, the principal's here. But the little ones are easier with that. So they were excited to see me. We talked for a little bit. They were showing their animals and this sort of stuff. And then the teacher was able to do a roll with them. So she called their name and they would raise their hand on the Zoom, which I was like, wow, amazing. They can do this. The kids are figuring it out. She gave them a compliment around community. I spoke for just, a minute or two while they were getting their ice cream and things ready. And then she was able to get a movie going so they could all watch the same movie at the same time. And it was just really beautiful to see that could happen, because I had some serious doubts about this happening in the past, and she proved me absolutely wrong. So I texted her in the way I was like, oh my God, you figured it out. Like, you know how to do this. But like I was telling Cindy before, the teachers who really saw families as learning partners and built authentic relationships with families before this happened, they've been able to continue a lot of this here. And those teachers who weren't able to, for whatever reason, build those relationships, that way they've struggled more in engaging with the families and engaging with the students before, because it's hard to create something now that wasn't there before. Mm-hmm. Yeah, but that's a huge win.
How about for you, Cindy?
Yeah, there have been lots of fun ways that I've seen our students connect with each other and with their advisor through Zoom. And last week I was on a Zoom where it kind of was a spontaneous thing. We had a whiteboard we popped the whiteboard up, and somebody just started a picture, and pretty soon everybody's in there, and it turned, I think we got a screenshot of it, but it was just this great scene with crazy fun things from nature and people and whimsical things. And it was just a chance for us to connect and laugh and use creative energy. But I really think the win right now is our kids really trust us that it's important to finish this year with their exhibitions. So we have one after another. That's what I'll be doing for the next several days, is watching our students take this Zoom screen, take control, and share what they've been doing and share the evidence of their learning in a really authentic way. And I don't mean tasks, I mean what I did to really grow and learn this year. And so that to me is like, that's always a celebration.
That's a huge win.
Oh, that's fantastic. Well, thank you so much, Cindy McMahon, principal of the community school in Spokane, and Justin Hendrickson, principal of South Shore K-8 in Seattle. And thanks to all of you for participating and submitting questions. If your question wasn't answered, Cindy and Justin, how can people contact you?
Sure. We can put it in the chat.
Yep. I'll put
Okay.
my email in the chat.
Great. And if the email addresses that I use to communicate with you work, could I share those in the follow-up email as well?
You bet.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely.
Great. I will do that. Also, League of Education Voters has gathered resources available in communities across Washington state to help us get through this difficult time. Everything from meal services, distance learning resources, school guidance from OSPI, and college scholarship supports to mental health supports, internet and technology resources, childcare, and employment resources. You will find our COVID-19 resources page on our website, educationvoters.org. Our next LEVinar is Thursday, June 11th. That's next Thursday. A panel of superintendents from across Washington will share what's working in their districts and what they need now to better support students during COVID-19 and during this greater period of protests and really systems change. At least that's where I like to see it go. Seattle Superintendent Denise Juneau, Spokane Superintendent Shelley Redinger, Everett Superintendent Ian Saltzman, North Kitsap Superintendent Lauren Evans, and Freeman Superintendent Randy Russell will also address racial equity and answer your questions. You can register by visiting our website, educationvoters.org, click on events, then lunchtime webinars. I'll also send registration information in a follow-up email. Also coming up on June 26th, Treehouse CEO Lisa Chin and Chief Program Officer Angela Griffin will share how their nonprofit organization took immediate action to respond to the challenges of COVID-19 and outline how we can best support students in foster care. Thank you to each of you for joining us today. If you have additional questions or comments, please send them to Arik@educationvoters.org. That's A-R-I-K, I spell my name a little weird, ARIK@educationvoters.org. A recording of today's presentation will be available on our website, educationvoters.org, and it will be sent to you in the follow-up email that'll land in your inbox in about 24 hours. Feel free to share this recording with your friends and colleagues. If you'd like to learn more about League of Education Voters or support our work, just visit our website, educationvoters.org. Thank you again for attending. Each one of us has the right to feel safe and valued. Together, we'll fight for a world in which true educational and economic equity exists. We look forward to seeing you at future webinars. Cindy, Justin, thank you so much for joining us. I really appreciate everything that you offered.
Thanks, Sarah. Thanks, Cindy.